Subscribe or they will haunt you.
Subway workers, tunnel rats, and explorers of Reddit, what's your scariest, unexplained true story of the underground? Where I grew up there were a few storm drains that all went to the same pond. My friend A and I were messing around in the woods near one of the openings and we could hear this really sharp echoing cry that made us both nervous. We thought it was the wind at first and then A threw a rock into the opening and it stopped for a minute, so at this point we figured it must be something alive. We climbed back out of the woods and went to the next pipe and could hear it there too. Now I'm scared and A is trying to prove how he's not afraid of anything, so on we go to the next one. This one is quieter, so we go back in the other direction. Now I'm being a baby because it's raining a little and I'm not supposed to get my clothes wet. I was around 9, so I'm begging A to go home. As he stops to assure me we are safe, we hear this horrible, deep, wailing noise and I start to panic. I can feel my pulse in my neck and I'm sweating, and A puts his face into the opening for the drain. The noise happens again and A takes off down the hill and into the pipe opening. I am now crying because A abandoned me in the rain and there's a monster in the pipes. A starts yelling my name and I have to put my face to the opening to hear him, so now I'm really crying. And he tells me to call the fire department, so I run to the nearest neighbor and tell them to. I explain I don't know why we need to call, but that A is in the pipe outside their house. They get all snotty because A is the heaviest kid in the neighborhood, so they assume he got stuck. They call the non-emergency number and a truck comes to remove the cover. Turns out A recognized the sound of an angry cat and ran into the pipe. It was a mama cat and her kittens, but the kittens were stuck beneath the wire grate inside the drain, so the rain was drowning them and they were crying. Thanks to A, they got all but one kitten out and the mama cat in time before the rain got worse. He got to keep one of the kittens and no one believed us, even though we were both there and there were firemen. No one believed he could fit into the pipe. I'm not sure I qualify, since the explanation seems rather straightforward to me. Another group of explorers. Still, I have a pretty good story. I attended the University of Huddersfield, and one of the accommodation facilities for students is called Storthes Hall. Storthes Hall was previously a psychiatric hospital, an asylum. Most of the buildings were demolished. I believe 2 are currently in use to house students. And then off-site there's the main building and the mortuary. The main building was off limits and I believe security guards were in place. But when you have several hundred drunk students living nearby, you're basically just grabbing sand. I went with a group of people and we intended to have some kind of DIY seance. Darren Brown had done his not long before, so we toddled off with tarot cards and a Ouija board. It was all pretty funny, to be honest. None of us really took it seriously, and having seen the Darren Brown seance, I was really skeptical. Then the torch died, and we heard several loud knocks. We f***ed off sharpish, but again, it likely was somebody fucking with us after hearing the panic caused by the torch going out. Might have even been the security guards. I wouldn't blame them. There's an abandoned and boarded up WWII fort in the southern part of Belgium that we often sneak into with the scouts. Getting in there requires scaling a sheer wall where we've placed anchoring points for ropes and climbing gear next to a relatively busy road. So you're being super quiet, making no light and cowering every time a car passes by so he doesn't spot you in his lights. The atmosphere is set. The moment you enter it, it's like diving into water. Sound stops and the entire place is at a constant 14 degrees Celsius, with a slight breeze passing through. The tunnel is barely large enough for me, slightly broader than the average person, to pass without turning my body sideways. The tunnel is just high enough to work up a decent gait while hunched over. If someone ahead of you blocks a passage for a moment, the breeze stops and it feels like the entire tunnel network takes a breath. Because of the way the tunnels are constructed, they echo in such a way that your own footsteps seem to be coming from behind you. They also seem to take one more step than you do when you stop. Of course, we don't allow the guys and gals to take any source of light in there, so it's pretty scary overall. So I'm in there, posted at a side passage to ensure everyone takes the same path and doesn't get lost. I go in first before any of the climbers arrive, so they don't know there are friendly faces in there to help them. I'm in there for a while, just waiting for the first to come by, when I see a dancing little light coming down the long hallway. I quietly settle back in my nook and wait for whoever was smart enough to hide some matches and take them away. The light quietly bobs closer when I realize there aren't any footsteps accompanying it. I poke my head around the corner just in time to see it disappear. I hear no footsteps still. I settle back and wait some more, when I realize I do hear some scuffling, very faint breathing noises, but still very faint. I become aware of a wet heat coming from right in front of me, with a faint smell of person, sweat, dirt. Suddenly I realize there's someone there, right in front of me, inches from my face. The breathing stops suddenly. Whatever it is aware of me as well. Whatever or whoever it is, we're both holding our breath, both acutely aware of each other. It takes ages. I'm sitting there, unable to move, speak or breathe properly. The wet heat passes and some minutes later I become aware of very faint light coming from my right side, which soon dissipates and leaves. Sometime later still, I hear the familiar stomping of combat boots coming down the hallway from my left. I stop the person, tell them to keep following the passageway and take the first right they come to. Out of curiosity, I ask who went in first. No one. He went in first. It was explained much later. The first guy got lost down a dead-end side passage and the second girl passed him by. She got nervous from the footsteps and removed her shoes. She saw me poke my head from around the corner and dropped the match. She passed me very slowly. One of the later checkpoints said she was crying her eyes out. A repost from me. There used to be an old abandoned school in a town by my house. It was heavily boarded up and super hard to get into. Well, a friend and I managed to get inside by climbing up the side of the school via a pipe fire escape combo and slipping through a window on the roof. We explored the basement, which was flooded. It was kinda creepy seeing stairs disappear into water. We had just left the gym when we heard footsteps coming from the doors on the other side of the gym. Scary, especially considering it sounded like it was one person, not another group of explorers like us, and blocking our exit back up to the roof. The only way out otherwise was behind us, through boarded up doors. They sounded like someone who was walking around and stopping periodically. There was no light coming from that direction, and we couldn't fathom why someone would come into a creepy place like this alone. We waited for the footsteps to stop, then snuck across the gym, peered down the hallways, saw no one, and continued towards the stairs which would lead us back to the roof. Halfway down the hall, we hear someone sprinting behind us, probably 50 meters away or so, down a typical high school hallway. Now, it is mostly dark in here, but there was a small amount of light coming in through cracks in the window boards. Still, we didn't see anything behind us as we quickly ran up the stairs. We didn't stop until we got back to the 4th floor. We listened for noise. Nothing. Hopped out the window and climbed back down the pipe. Freshman year of high school, I noticed this large panel under an old staircase in the basement of a school building. For years my buddies and I talked about opening it, but it was across the hall from the office of the lady in charge of misdemeanors and suspensions. Fast forward to the last day of senior year after most everyone had left. My two buddies and I, in formal attire from the day's events, unscrewed the panel from the wall. Sure enough, there was a tunnel about 5 feet below the floor. Luckily there was a sturdy stool for us to climb down. There was a system of tunnels down there, but our exploration was limited since we were in good clothes, and there was standing water down some of the tunnels. The unexplained part is that, while there were pipes where we went, there were tunnels without pipes that went out from the building's footprint and not towards any other building. These tunnels had inches deep standing, nasty water, so we couldn't go in them in rented dress shoes. But we could make out that they connected to other tunnels which seemed to serve no purpose. I doubt there was anything sinister going on, but we thought it was pretty creepy at the time. Was playing in the woods and tripped over something solid. Found it was a cement circle, and realized it was an underground door. The next day I come back with a crowbar to open, and like hell I'm going in unarmed. Pull it up, and it's a Cold War era personal bomb shelter. That failed. There was a giant crack in the roof. The floor was covered in slime. But what was worse is the walls are covered in writings. This is the end, we must die, everyone is gone. Till I find the back wall, and a giant red scroll. Get the f*** out of my home. That's it. F*** this. I'm fucking out. I sprint up the door and close it. I don't want to know what the hell that was. But I come back the next day. It's burned out. I didn't set a fire intentionally, and I didn't smell smoke leaving. My grandpa got lost in Mammoth Cave after he got back from WWII. Apparently before he was drafted it was not a national park and the rules around exploring it were very loose. The property it was on was privately owned and locals were known to trespass to explore the cave. Or that's what my grandpa used to tell me. He and his friends very well may have been the only people trespassing. While my grandpa was serving in the Pacific Theater, the cave became a national park. After arriving home, my grandpa and his friends that survived the war went back to explore for old time's sakes. They were wandering around with flashlights when they heard a tour group. Considering they weren't in there legally and had bypassed many federal trespassing signs, they cut the lights and slowly but surely tried to walk unnoticed back to the entrance. Unfortunately, they went deeper and spent 17 hours in there before getting out. He didn't have many stories because apparently you inch along in complete darkness without being able to see your hand in front of your face. But he said one of his friends kept saying we didn't survive that shit to die in here. Not exactly related, but my uncle survived 3 years in the South Pacific during WW2 only to get struck by lightning and die a year after coming home. My buddy and me spent many years crawling through sewer pipes. One day we were out in the woods, me, him and another friend. We were deep in the woods. We found some pipe sticking out of a hillside and agreed to explore it. Well, we crawled down this thing a good 600 feet or so, on our hands and knees. At times it gets smaller and we are on our stomachs. Finally it comes to one of those big manhole rooms, and we get the impression we're under a house. Of course, I also know that in some places manholes will exist in the middle of nowhere for future developments. Anyways, the room has 3 other sewer or small pipes heading off into different directions, like slither on your stomach size. We choose one and make our friend Z go first. We go down about 300 feet and he shouts back that there's something in the way. He thinks it's a dead animal, but since we are using weak headlamps he could tell. We coerce him to climb over it. Then comes me, Hess freaking out saying shit is all over his clothes and he didn't know what it was. I climb over this dark lump of refuse. Feels like a body but not human, not even animal, just alien. Smells bad, smells horrible. I slide over this nasty shit almost puking. My buddy behind me comes next. Same story. We keep going, asking ourselves why we even do this shit in the first place. Exploration, etc. into the unknown, the forbidden. We crawl another few hundred feet. Z starts complaining about a horrible god-awful stench ahead. We can't for the life of him get him to continue. He ends up throwing up. We start throwing the idea around of gas of some sort. He says with his headlamp there's something big up ahead. Looks like a honest-to-God body. Human maybe. We slide backwards quickly until we get to the manhole room. We crawl out quickly. We get into the daylight and investigate the shit stuck to our clothes from the thing we slid over. It's dark, bloody dark, refuse dark, looks like fur. We agree that it was probably a trapped animal. Never go back ever again. I currently attend a state university full-time. By the description you might be able to figure out which one. I'm currently a senior living in private housing downtown. but sophomore year I lived in the university's only downtown quad. It was built in the early 1920s and definitely looked it compared to the uptown campus and housing quads. I was in the basement lounge area grabbing my mail when I noticed a nearby door that wasn't usually open and a nearby maintenance worker. I casually asked the guy what was down there. He said, "Dunno. We just store our materials on the stairs." My curiosity got the better of me and I asked him if I could take a look to see what was all the way at the bottom of the flight of stairs. He said, "I don't see why not. Just don't get hurt on anything down there and try to be back before my supervisor gets back in 15. This guy should definitely have not let me down there because he clearly hadn't seen it. There was friable asbestos literally everywhere, particularly the decomposing ceiling tiles. I turned on my phone flashlight to find that it was some kind of sealed off research area. The stairs led to a hallway which looks like it may have been hospital-like at one time, but it had since experienced some heavy water damage. There were approximately 7 rooms on either side with one-way glass pane in each, with some kind of 90s intercom panel to the right. Inside each room were heavily rusted bed frames, a sink, and a toilet. All the way at the end of the hall were a series of file cabinets. I would have looked to see what they contained but figured it would only be a cloud of black mold spores, so I decided against it. Nothing inherently creepy about the area I suppose, but definitely interesting. There's an old half-torn down school on the air base outside of my hometown. The supposedly haunted old grain silos about a quarter-mile away get more attention, but the school is what me and my friends were obsessed with. We had gone in during the day and poked around, finding the typical bullshit graffiti teenagers make in places like that, like "F God" with the anarchy symbol and "All Hail the Zodiac Killer." Stupid shit like that. We wanted to go in at night but didn't want to break our necks doing it, which ended up being a smart choice, since there were holes in the floor that went all the way down to the basement, which seemed to have about just above ankle-deep standing water at the time. We didn't get really freaked out until later when we went back at night, and as we're psyching ourselves up to go in, some kind of early 90s blue Ford and a gun rack pulls into the empty parking lot. Its lights cut right through the car and made it hard to see much, but it spooked the hell out of us. We got the hell out of there, but the truck followed us around the airbase for the better part of half an hour, turning on its high beams and tailgating us, and then turning their lights off completely and acting like they were tailing us, in spite of it only being the 2 cars on the road at that hour, plus the airbase being, abandoned. We're just glad we were still in the car and not inside when they got there.